quicker you can get comfortable with disruption being the norm, and the quicker you can accept like fundamental changes, which may go against your own interests within an industry or a business, just the easier life will be for you. And I think, again, that comes back to being a product of, are you interested in history or do you read a lot? It's funny, like how many conversations I have with other Bitcoiners about books. You think, oh, wow, Bitcoiners read a lot of books. It's like, no, people who read a lot of books become Bitcoiners because they have such a vast knowledge base. I think, richness in beauty and creativity is the result of freeing up human capacity and potential for people to pursue the things they love and that they would spend time on if they had the ability. So, what's the bedrock of people being able to do something like that? It's, do their savings persist over time? The natural effects of technology being deflationary is that purchasing power is growing over time, and you constantly get more and more of your time back to focus on things you love. It was always going to be him. It was just a matter of time. If you give someone like him, $500 million in cash, and you turn up the dial of inflation, and then, you say, okay, figure it out. He was always going to go through that process of elimination and end up at Bitcoin. So the more and more I think about it, the more and more I think he's not lucky. It was just always going to be him. There are these dominant digital networks that are going to appear because all these markets are winner take all, when you basically have the internet creating a single global market and you have all these frictions eliminated. So a very, very clear idea to follow. And the thesis was absolutely correct. And he absolutely put his money where his mouth is, and his wealth multiplied massively after kind of what we today know as the Mag 7 and the FANG stocks have kind of done what they've done. So it's just a deep study into how technology changes incentives, creates new markets and network effects.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Think Bitcoin podcast, where I talk to Bitcoiners about big ideas, about art, philosophy, and the humanities. If you've been enjoying the show, please take a second to like, rate, and of course, subscribe to the show. It really does make a difference. Today's guest is Anil Patel. Anil is the author of the Bitcoin Handbook and most recently, the Treasury of Michael Saylor. We talk about Saylor's journey, his insights, the importance and the challenge of recognizing paradigm shifts, art and creativity, storytelling, Bitcoin education, and much more. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Anil Patel. All right, we are live. Anil Patel, welcome to the Think Bitcoin podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Logan. Good to meet again. We met for the first time, a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago now, in
Yeah, it's
DC.
hard to believe it's been that long, actually.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on. Excited
Of course.
to chat.
Yeah, so Anil, you wrote this great book, which everybody can see behind me here, The Treasury of Michael Saylor, which is this incredible, I kind of think of it as a curated map of Michael Saylor's thinking and his insights and perspectives on everything, which we're going to dig into, obviously. Before we do, though, I'd like to get some background from you, just for listeners who might not know your full story, kind of how you got all the way here. They maybe know bits and pieces of it. Can you just tell the listeners, how you got into Bitcoin? What were you actually doing before Bitcoin? What was your kind of life like before that? And how did you get to the point where you decided, I'm going to start writing books? Because this isn't your first book either. So you're kind of a seasoned author at this point. But how did that journey go?
Yeah, look, I did a lot of things. My background was in the music industry on the business side. I worked in higher education at a university. I worked for a startup. So I tried a lot of different things, and I was always, my interest in Bitcoin kind of grew and grew, and I was looking for a way in. And this is kind of a roadmap I suggest to anyone looking to kind of find a way to leave the fiat world if they want to work full time in Bitcoin or get more involved. Is I just started putting out the material I was learning about Bitcoin. I would refine it and then just publicly post it. And I built up enough of a portfolio, I guess, of work in public that then companies, when they were kind of going on their, hiring sprees in, 17, 18, that was when I kind of could make the jump full time into Bitcoin. So I got to work for a number of companies like, Swan, Unchained, Bitcoin Magazine, and I'm also like an active angel investor. So I'm an investor in about a dozen Bitcoin companies. And then also through that process, I just kept accumulating more and more material or educational resources that I thought, you know, uh, these would make great books. And that was the result. They then turned into books. And luckily, the Bitcoin community is very supportive. They'll tell you what they want. They'll tell you what they're willing to buy, and yeah, you just kind of listen to the market.
That's fascinating. Your journey, actually, I'm sure you probably know Frank Corva, who was, I guess, he just stopped being the White House correspondent at Bitcoin Magazine, but had been working there for a while. Frank, I had him on a few weeks ago. He also worked in the music industry, also a teacher. I was also a teacher back in the day. I'm an attorney now, but it's fascinating to me the different roads that people take to Bitcoin. Kind of a segue into my next question, which is just the purpose of this pod. One of the two purposes is I like to explore, obviously, the idea of Bitcoin as it intersects with the arts and the humanities. I'm sure you have lots of takes on that yourself, being somebody who's out of the music industry. But also, I like to highlight the fact that a lot of Bitcoiners are way more multidimensional and interdisciplinary than I think the common stereotype that's out there for Bitcoiners is. There's this idea that we're kind of this monolith of, either shadowy supercoders or libertarian bros. And that's kind of coming away a little bit the more mainstream we get. But now the stereotype, I think, is that, we're, suit coiners and, Wall Street and all this stuff now. And I find it fascinating the different paths that folks that I talk to take to Bitcoin. And I actually think maybe the most spectacularly interdisciplinary person in Bitcoin is probably Michael Saylor, who is just so well versed in so many different fields. So, my question to you is: do you think that's fair to say about Michael Saylor that he's almost uniquely uh, interdisciplinary in his approach to thinking? And how important do you think it is, as somebody who is both a learner and a teacher of Bitcoin, to have that kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, like intellectual athleticism that Saylor demonstrates to both learn and communicate about Bitcoin?
Yeah, he's exceptionally talented, and you know the communication piece. You got to remember he's had 30 years of practice in the public markets, right? Of media training, of going on, CNBC. Uh, he's very well seasoned. So when people have their first interaction with him in 2024, 2025, and they're thinking, "Oh my goodness, who is this guy?" It's like that's the product of decades and decades of refinement and iteration around messaging. So he just knows how to do it because he's had so much practice. In terms of like interdisciplinary thinking, yeah, I think it's very fair to say if you look at his background, everything from jet pilot to wanting to be in a rock band, to wanting to be a professor. He's written a book as well, which we can get into a bit later. So he's obviously done a lot of different things. And if you look at the company he founded in MicroStrategy and all the different products they've produced over the years and the ups and downs they've had, like he's had an interesting life. He's got a
Hmm.
lot of lessons to draw on that have been translated into wisdom. So I think that's where people maybe underestimate him a bit. So they don't realize the life he's lived.
Yeah, no, for sure. Um, when it comes to art, beauty, this kind of low time preference, cultural stuff, what do you think Saylor would say about the ways in which Bitcoin, may have a positive effect on that side of things? Creativity, art, the humanities, or if Bitcoin does anything positive to the environment for those things. And I'm also curious to know what your take is on that. If you think Bitcoin is sort of, I guess, a positive catalyst or maybe a way to clear this kind of fiat ground that a lot of creatives are dying in now. And I think you probably have a unique perspective on that given your background.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't speak for Michael, but certainly if you look at, um, he's well known to have done very well from, just some domain names that he bought very early on. And probably one of the most valuable ones in his possession is hope.com. How many four-letter word domains are out in the market today? And the fact that he chose to make that pretty much a shrine to Bitcoin education kind of tells you exactly what he thinks about Bitcoin its relationship to being hopeful about the future. So yeah, it's hard not to be optimistic when you understand economics and sound money and the negative repercussions that unsound money has on the society. Well, a return to sound money is nothing but a very, very hopeful, optimistic thing.
Do you think there were, I mean, I guess when you look historically about, at periods where we did have sound money, I guess like in Florence or Rome, and we think about the artistic environments there and what makes a culture thrive. I guess twofold question here. One, do you think for a truly thriving culture, or for I guess for a culture to really flourish and thrive, that a certain richness in the arts is necessary? And second question is, do you think that, assuming we're on the cusp of maybe a shift back to sound money with Bitcoin, do you think that it's plausible that we're on the cusp of another creative, I guess, epoch like those in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, richness in beauty and creativity is the result of freeing up human capacity and potential for people to pursue the things they love, and that they would spend time on if they had the ability. So, what's the bedrock of people being able to do something like that? It's, do their savings persist over time and preserve their purchasing value? You know, can they work, save, and then, the natural effects of technology being deflationary is that purchasing power is growing over time, and you constantly get more and more of your time back to focus on things you love. And in some cases, those are, profitable enterprises in themselves. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just for the love of something. So, you notice that in Bitcoiners, they really focus, the ones who are producing products and services, they focus on quality. They understand the relationship between money and time preference. And, if you're building long-term relationships with customers, say, um, you want to go on that journey together for the long term. So absolutely, I think there's a relationship between a return to beauty, with sound money.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's well said. Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I think Saifedean in his book sort of, not that he necessarily gets it wrong, but I think he just sort of maybe misdiagnoses certain things when he talks about art. And my joke is basically, I think Saifedean just hates Mark Rothko. He saw Mark Rothko painting and just really hated it, and was like, that's all I need to see.
Yeah,
But I
well,
think what you
that's
go
also
ahead.
the other problem is the nefarious incentives of a fiat system, and you look at the you know tax implications of uh, donating art, and yeah, that the impact that's had on valuations, and then the opportunities that's made for modernist art. Yeah, I mean it just makes sense given the incentives, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think like the hyper monetization of art is certainly deeply, deeply problematic. But I think what you said is important too, though, that it's I think it's important for the audience of art to have Bitcoin. Basically, I mean, Bitcoin kind of frees, if you save in Bitcoin, now you have kind of the bandwidth. You're a little bit off. You can step off the hamster wheel a little bit. You have time to maybe sit down and engage with like a serious piece of art, whether that's a piece of visual art or whether that's reading a novel that's not, Twilight, no disrespect necessarily to Twilight, but I mean a little bit of disrespect, but but you get more space to do that. You can kind of spread your wings a little bit, philosophically and intellectually. And I think that certainly makes for a richer discourse. But I think the audience component of that just gets left out of the discussion a lot. Like I think we just have a better, right now. There's just not an audience for that type of stuff, and you can see that given what's considered mainstream entertainment or mainstream art now these days across all mediums, is there's really just nobody has the time or the energy or the bandwidth or the headspace to sit down and even just sit in silence for like 25 minutes to read. I mean, it's just a struggle for most people. So I think Bitcoin hopefully restores some of that to the audience, which is, I think, a part of the safety maybe leaves out. But I'm also kind of okay with Mark Rothko myself. But um, anyways, so let's jump into this book. So this book, again, I'm going to plug it again. It's behind me. I have my sort of like marked up copy here as well. I got double. So I definitely want to plug it. I think my, I guess, personal plug for this book is I have two children. They're very, very young. They're no way even close to an age where they would consider getting like an MBA or something like that. But I think this book, which you can buy for like 15 or $20, I also think you're giving it away for free,
Correct. Yep.
which is super badass. That's awesome. So everybody, you can literally read this for free. You should pay for it though, because Anil deserves it, but you can read it for free. And I think it's probably on like a, pound for pound basis, one of the most like valuable, intellectually valuable books that somebody looking to succeed or to wrap their arms around the world and how it works, business, capital, finance. There's a lot there. So I definitely want to just give a very spirited plug for the book. I'm having just a blast going through it, and going through different sections more than once. But when did you decide to write this book, and why this book? Like, what's the why behind this? I mean, there's a lot of things you could write about in Bitcoin that you have written about in Bitcoin. Why devote a book length treatment to Michael Saylor's thinking?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in mentors, and finding your own mentors. So the people who you think are maybe the most interesting, or the people you could learn the most about. And the great thing about the internet is you don't actually have to know them, or have a personal relationship with them. Fortunately, I did have the ability to contact Michael, and you know, the idea for this book came about because I curate a lot of educational content, and over time, I just realized a bigger and bigger share of that content was coming from Michael's head. And um, there's a great book out there called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and Eric Jorgensen, who made the book, basically took this guy's thoughts, tweets, interview transcripts, and condensed them into a book. And he did a fantastic job. I think it sold over 1 million copies to this point, and it kind of created this new category of biography. And Michael, as most people know, he already wrote a book in 2012 with Mobile Wave. And after that experience, he kind of said, "Look, I wrote the book. No one read it. If I ever see this again, this being a very obvious opportunity in a paradigm shift within technology, it's like, I'm not going to write a book. I'm just going to buy as much of it as I possibly can, corporately, personally, and then I'm just going to go on like a speaking tour and tweet about it." So that was kind of the impetus for me thinking, well, I'm going to write the book. I want to own that book. Going back to your question earlier about art, it's, I don't care if there's a market for this. This is something, I want to own. And I think going through the process creatively of distilling all this information and these lessons and the analogies will be useful to me. And, fortunately, the end result was a book that other people can enjoy. And, like you have got a couple of young kids as well, and you know that you have to be very clear in your messaging. And, you know, uh, there are a lot of great analogies and lessons, I think, that he draws from his own life that are very applicable to Bitcoin and can help a whole new cohort of people grok Bitcoin. So that was kind of the reasoning.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into some of those metaphors, because I think he's just, my background is I went to grad school for English literature. Like you, I was in education for a bit. So, you know, the idea of the metaphor is one that I spend a lot of time thinking about myself. And I think Saylor is just uniquely talented, I think, in just drawing these metaphors and sort of weaving this sort of tapestry of meaning in that way, and just tapping into different people's what's going to work for different people. There's a lot to grab onto there for different folks. But Anil, when you were putting this book together, and you're obviously, I think the back has all the credits to basically everywhere you pulled everything from, and it's pretty exhaustive. I mean, there's like you clearly did a lot. You went through a lot to put this together and curate this the way that you did. Did anything did anything surprise you, I guess, in your research, or was there any piece of either his thinking or his kind of intellectual journey as you were studying it that stood out to you that maybe you didn't pay attention to as much before, that kind of jumped out at you and you thought, whoa, wow, this was actually something that people don't talk about enough when it comes to him?
It was the research around Michael before Bitcoin, before a lot of us came to know him. Um, the deeper I went into his background and his own journey and the journey of the company, um, it just made it very clear to me that Michael becoming the kind of face and voice of maybe say Bitcoin for many people today, in my mind now, is very clear that it was always going to be him. It was just a matter of time. There was just no one I can think of who was so well primed to grasp Bitcoin, to have the resources and the position he did to then execute in a way that he did. By being at the time CEO of a publicly traded company with all this cash. Um, so it just kind of it he kind of takes an engineer's view to everything, um, every problem that comes to him. So it just made sense that if you give someone like him, $500 million in cash, and you turn up the dial of inflation, and then you say, okay, figure it out. He was always going to go through that process of elimination and end up at Bitcoin. So the more and more I think about it, the more and more I think he's not lucky. It was just always going to be him. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite sections in the book is the section on the mobile wave. I guess the book that he wrote, which is, that period of time before Bitcoin, obviously. And you quoted the one line there where he kind of said, which is obviously in the book, or if he ever saw this opportunity again, he would just kind of go all in, basically and he had that clarity. Can you talk a little bit about that mobile wave period? What was he doing during the mobile wave, for folks that maybe are a little bit less familiar, haven't gotten that far in the book? And, that how did he reach that level of clarity, where he just decided, you know what, I'm probably going to see this type of thing again. And if I do, it's basically full conviction, full port, all in.
Yeah. So what he did, and there are some very famous interview clips of him kind of talking to reporters in the maybe early 2010s of having these seemingly insane predictions of where Apple and Amazon might go in the future. And I'm sure at the time he was just looked at very strangely for his views. But the thesis in the book is basically that there are these dominant digital networks that are going to appear because all these markets are winner take all, when you basically have the internet creating a single global market and you have all these frictions eliminated. So a very, very clear idea to follow. And the thesis was absolutely correct. And he absolutely put his money where his mouth is, and his wealth multiplied massively after kind of what we today know as the Mag 7 and the FANG stocks have kind of done what they've done. So it's just a deep study into how technology changes incentives, creates new markets and network effects. And, he kind of, one of his degrees at MIT was in the history of sort of these technological paradigm shifts. So he's been studying them his whole life. He understands like pattern recognition as a piece of this. And I'm sure everyone knows about the tweet in 2013 where he kind of derides Bitcoin. But I'm sure at the time it was obviously on his radar, and he's now just looking for all those kind of checkpoints to see when is this going to be at a point of maturity where the risk is low enough that I can actually say this is going to be the thing. So I'm sure it kind of 2020, it kind of reached that threshold for him and it all clicked.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me to think about the, I guess, but you kind of anticipated my next question, which is just his education in history, his command of history, his erudition when it comes to history. Seems like it grounds his thinking a lot. I guess you described it as pattern recognition, which I think is pretty apt, probably pretty spot on, where he's kind of building this reservoir of previous scenarios so that other people just don't really have. I mean, your normal retail investor is not thinking, thousands of years ago about the history of technology across millennia and when these things repeat. He clearly is, and it's clearly something that he's, like you said, studied. I'm just, I don't know. I find that just deeply fat. He to me is this type of investor that I guess there's this quote that I saw recently. I forget who said it, but it was kind of like the person with the longest time horizon normally wins. And I'm curious how you think about that with respect to Saylor and how he's pulling all these things together. Because I think he thinks in like he doesn't really talk about quarter to quarter stuff. He talks in epochs basically. But how does that factor in the just the time horizon that he's taking combined with his I guess deep command of history? He's kind of gazing forward 1,000 years, backward 2,000 years.
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, you nailed it. If you look at any of the presentations he's given or interviews he's given, where he gives any kind of, I wouldn't even call it a price prediction because he's very methodical about how he gets to that eventual number. They're all decade plus 20 years. I think one of his most famous recent presentations was 21 years from now, and he's talking about what Bitcoin might be, or what the market cap of Bitcoin might be. So he's, yeah, absolutely, I think, completely unfazed by short-term noise. And, you know, he's had his share of critics his whole career, so that's nothing new. I don't think that phases him. But yeah, I absolutely think he's looking in decades. And the problem with the paradigm shifts is you can never precisely pinpoint when that inflection point occurs, right? If if you have the right thesis, you need to get on board, and then you just have to wait for the world to catch up, and you're never going to be able to anticipate all these factors at play that might slow down or speed up that transition. So yeah, I'd say he has a very low time preference, and you've got to remember this is someone who 30 years ago, or in the early 2000s, sorry, so yeah, 25 years ago, saw like 90+% drop in his share price and probably personal net worth as well, I'm guessing. So there's a very real pain there. To work your way back from there to where he is today, I don't think he's taking any shortcuts. So I'm sure him and now the management team and Fung, the new CEO, I'm sure they're very focused, like decades. They're really not too concerned, I think, about the short term.
Yeah, and you brought up a fascinating point too. Like and I'm not sure everybody knows this, but I mean, I guess it was the .com bust. I mean, you have a picture in the book. It's like it's like a front page newspaper clip from, I forget which newspaper. It says, he loses like $6 billion in a single day. When the .com bubble bursts, and obviously that's a kind of like profound, precipitous, uh, disorienting, breathtaking loss there in terms of capital. What do you think? I mean, most people don't come out of that. They don't kind of come back from that. Um, do you think? I mean, how much did were you able to kind of study and get insight into that particular era of Saylor, and maybe how did he deal with that? How was he thinking about that at the time, and how did he kind of get back on his feet, or was he just kind of cool and collected throughout the whole thing?
So I have no unique insight into that period of his life. I think there are a few interviews around that point. But if you take there, I read a lot of biographies of people who have built great companies or invented, very useful technologies that we now widely use. And there's a very clear trend, and of great investors as well. There's a very clear trend of people having a huge setback early in life, whether it's a bankruptcy, a company, falling apart. Uh, yeah, it's almost like a required ingredient in the recipe for future success, because you need to understand how what you had, what you lost, and then when you have it again, you're actually able to hold on to it. So I don't know what his mental state was through that period, but I certainly look at it as a massive positive. If I was, holding MSTR stock today, that you would almost want the person steering the ship to have experienced some kind of pain like that, because they'll never want to return to it. And, when MicroStrategy adopted a Bitcoin standard, and there was a bit of maybe a mini bear market after the fact, and they were getting criticized and derided on, all the major networks. I think the Wall Street Journal did a pretty funny hit piece about
I
how they
did.
lost billions. Um, you just know that's part of it. You just have to accept that that's going to happen. So yeah.
Yeah. And he almost has this perfect hero's journey. It's almost like reading an adventure novel or something like that. He has this Joseph Campbell, rise, fall, return, Phoenix type of arc, I guess. Do you think that? I mean, do you think that he thinks about that at all? Um, there are some folks that I know, I mean, my wife and I kind of joke about sometimes is part of this. I feel like Michael Saylor is aware that he's a kind of a visionary and feels like maybe he should have, done this type of, I guess, transformative undertaking earlier in his career and kind of had a setback and has seen people like Zuckerberg and Elon, folks that I'm sure that he views as peers of his, kind of have this transcendent success, be rewarded by the market, and you can almost feel his desire to sort of be there and sort of have a similarly huge impact on the world. Do you think? I mean, do you think that's fair, or do you think I'm being unfair to him?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely correct. You look at the kind of lessons and stories he kind of draws upon. Someone he mentions very often is Rockefeller, and he kind of draws the parallels between what uh, he and strategy are trying to do in terms of reshaping capital markets. The same way Rockefeller kind of took a raw commodity in crude oil and then refined it at different levels for different audiences with different tastes. So yeah, I absolutely think he's kind of drawing on those playbooks. And if you're correct in the application and industry you pick, and you kind of end up having a monopoly, then yeah, what bigger market is there than the capital markets? Um, I think he's very aware that this could end up placing him up there with those greats.
Now, you've worked in education, Anil, and we've kind of talked about Saylor's engineering approach. But I'm curious about his storytelling ability. You mentioned obviously he's had decades of media training, so he's obviously very fluent, very savvy. But still, I think that there is something unique about my best friend from high school, Kevin, who's I'm sure listening to right now. He and I have joked before. You listen to a podcast with Michael Saylor, and it like takes him 10 minutes to get from to start talking about like the invention of fire. And I can't imagine that there's some media training personality out there who's saying, "Oh yeah, here's how you do it." You want to respond to the question. You just want to get to like the invention of the wheel as quickly as possible, and then just go from there. Like that's like there's still something I think unique to his storytelling. And like I said, you have a background in education. How important is storytelling? Just being able to tell the story of Bitcoin, how important is that to the education piece, to the communication piece of getting, because he still has to tell a strategy story to the market basically every day, because he's presenting something new to the market, and he's always telling the Bitcoin story, and he's told it in like 100 different ways, all of which are derived from these different historical analogs. How important is that? I mean, and do you think is there? I have a pretty big follow up to this, so I'll let you answer that one
Yeah.
first, and then I'll hit you with follow up.
So if I think of, if you take any average arena in any major city and you think, who could fill that arena if it was just one person and all they had was a microphone? And, 99 times out of 100, it's a comedian because they are the best storytellers. That's how they communicate, and they're also trying to change someone's thinking in the process. The vehicle is a joke, but they're trying to get you from A to B in an entertaining, humorous way. And so Michael had dreams when he was younger of being a professor. So he graduates from MIT. He actually gets into a PhD program. So he has that path ready for him. But hard to believe now, but he didn't have the money. He couldn't afford the PhD program. So he goes and gets a job, and that sends him on a totally different path. So I'm sure there's part of him that is, you kind of see it in some of his interviews or his speeches where you kind of think, oh, I could be at a finance conference or I could be sitting in a classroom and this could be my professor because it feels exactly the same.
Yeah.
So I just think, yeah, he's kind of found his formula, and it's obviously working. People are hungry for stories and stories that actually teach you something.
Yeah, I think it just really speaks to the power of storytelling too. I mean, you could have the most compelling idea, the most lucrative idea out there, but if you can't communicate it effectively, it's just going to take a lot longer for society to absorb it or maybe to recognize its value in the way that you are, I guess, presciently or in an early way, recognizing its value.
Yeah, and he has skin in the game too, right? It's all
Yeah,
good for someone to stand up in front of you and say, "Hey, Bitcoin's a really great thing." It's another thing when that person is like, "It's a really great thing, and I bought $50 billion of it." Who is more convincing?
right, exactly. And so my big follow up here is this is a thought experiment I like to have all the time, but where do you think Bitcoin would be now without Michael Saylor? If Michael Saylor does not come around, if he does not start buying Bitcoin, if he doesn't start doing everything that he's doing, where are we now?
Well, anyone who's read, Pierre Rochard's early essays, I think you've had
We
Pierre
have,
on your,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
perfect. So it's just a matter of time. Um, it probably would have been a couple of years delayed, maybe the whole um, cycle of where we are in the sort of treasury company adoption, or at least the scale. Maybe just as many companies would adopt it, but you wouldn't yet have the behemoth that is strategy. So I'm sure it's always going to happen. It would just probably look a bit different, and it would have been a bit slower, is my opinion.
It's crazy how, like, when Pierre was on, we were talking about that 2014 article, Speculative Attack, which is just almost like unimaginably like accurate, really, given, and it was like 11 years ago. But I kind of think it's Sailor. I agree, probably inevitable. I think it probably, I mean, right now, I think what Sailor did was probably tilt the probabilities more sort of in favor of all this, not just happening, but happening faster. I mean, I think it would take a longer time for us to sort of get over is this a 50% chance that we're going to kind of go all the way here? If not for Sailor, but I think he's definitely accelerated the process in a way that probably was really hard to predict pre Sailor, because he's just kind of this unstoppable force right now. Um, how do you think about, like, so I think, like, two breakthroughs here. Obviously, he sort of invented the Bitcoin Treasury Company. But, you also have in the book too, I mean, it's very up to date when you're talking about um, the sort of suite of preferred equity as well, and his kind of innovation on digital credit, which I think is a second big innovation. How do you think about that?
So anyone who's followed the strategy story closely, they've tried a lot of different things, right? They kind of started out just converting the cash on their balance sheet to Bitcoin, which, it doesn't matter who you are, it makes perfect sense. Any individual, community group, charity, company, if you've got spare cash you don't need for the long term and you're looking for a savings vehicle, that's going to end up in Bitcoin. That's kind of the rational thing to do. So no surprises there. What's different in public markets versus a private company or you and I as individuals is there's a lot more game theory because you now have, you're competing for shareholder capital on a daily basis. So it's all well and good to put your long-term savings into Bitcoin. But if another company is doing the same thing, one of your competitors, and they're adding a bit of, say, leverage to it, and in a way that works out for them, well, then you become an acquisition target. So it now becomes a matter of survival. So you kind of have to be have an element of speed about you and urgency about you, which is kind of why you see companies now acquiring Bitcoin in ways that would be probably irresponsible for a family to do, but it's because they exist in public markets. So strategy, yeah, they first tried convertible notes. They quickly moved on to other forms of debt, and now we're kind of at this point where they have this suite of preferreds, and they're building out their own yield curve. And it doesn't matter if you know anything about finance. Ultimately, all you need to understand is you have someone who is incredibly smart, very bright, and is spending all day speaking to the smartest AI. What do you think will be the output of that? And also, this individual is incredibly well capitalized and has access to all the major. They have relationships with all the major banks. They have a massive shareholder base. Um, it's just a matter of time. They're going to keep innovating. They're going to keep iterating. There's going to be more and more products to serve different customers. Um, so yeah, it's becoming this snowball. I'm sure we haven't seen the end of the innovation in terms of Bitcoin backed credit coming out of strategy. But yeah, I don't think it's over. I don't think this is it. They've kind of drawn a line and said, yeah, we're done. We're just going to continue on business as usual.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly not tapped out yet. No, I was thinking while you were answering that question, Neil, about how much I personally have enjoyed learning. I mean, this is not, if you would have told me, I guess 5 or 10 years ago that, I would be kind of nerding out and having a really great time listening to, the Hurdle Rate podcast or watching MicroStrategy True North on Twitter live every Wednesday night, learning about innovations on corporate balance sheets. I mean, you can see all the books behind me are a pretty good representation of kind of what I'm into. If you would have told me, that's what I would be nerding out on right now, I would have said you're absolutely outside of your mind. That's doesn't even sound remotely interesting. I'm curious for you, what have you learned about yourself, I guess, in the process of maybe not just going through the Bitcoin journey, but also learning about Michael Saylor? I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel like Anil from 10 years ago would look at you now and be like, wow, you're talking about, yield curves and preferred equities, and you're talking about, cumulative dividends and all this stuff. I mean, what have you learned anything about yourself in this journey, or kind of how do you think about maybe the evolution of Anil throughout this process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess it's, I wouldn't say I'm someone who's interested in corporate finance at all. I have no background in corporate finance. It's just I'm pursuing the most interesting thing to me at a point in time. And there's clearly what I believe is a massive shift in capital markets, which will probably only happen, once every 500 years, say. Um, yeah, I want to pay attention to it. So I guess I'm just following or realizing just how much benefit there is now to actually understanding what's going on when these paradigm shifts happen. And just how fortunate we are, the more history you read, like to understand where we sit at the monetization of a new digital asset. Like that's insane. The chances of you being born during that period throughout all human history is close to zero. So you should pay attention because it's super exciting and interesting. Um, so yeah, when strategy has an earnings call, they've got one later
I
today.
think it's today. Yeah.
Yeah, they're probably going to have close to 500,000 people tuning in across all platforms, which is just insane for any company, but even so for a company that's not even in the S&P 500. Um, like this is a big deal. So whether you are interested in, balance sheets and preferred stocks or not, I think you can find something or some angle that makes this exciting for you.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much how I feel about it too. That's really well said. And I guess to follow up on that, do you think, as somebody who worked in the music industry, I mean, I'm sure that you have, I mean, I would assume, I guess, that you are interested in music, and maybe you play some music. But I think when I talk to people who are really interested in, art of various kinds, whether they're people who are writers, I have a lot of friends who write, friends who make music or into music in the music industry. I think those folks, I would kind of count myself among them, are always kind of looking back at previous, I guess, cultural turning points in history, almost kind of longingly wishing that you were a part of that movement at the time, whether that be kind of, like, people often look back at like the 60s, the artistic kind of efflorescence there, or like, the explosion of like film in Europe, like in the 60s too, or 70s, or even, just post World War II generally. Or I had Aaron Daniel on recently. He was talking about the Belle Epoque in Europe,
Oh, yeah.
right before World War I. Mean, yeah, we got from Bitcoin insurance to Gustav Klimt in an hour, and I was like, this is exactly the type of conversation we're trying to have here. But do you think that there's something in that to that, to like, folks like you, like Frank Corbis, similar, who recognize, are able to, because they have this, I guess, um, appreciation for or understanding of these different moments in the history of whatever art they're interested in, that they have their own kind of pattern recognition where they see, this is a transition moment. It just happens to not be in like art per
Yes,
se. It's corporate. Like, does that make sense what I'm saying?
absolutely. So yeah, my involvement in the music industry was very much, it was on the business side. So I was in it during a time of massive transformation. So going from, physical records to MP3s to piracy, from physical box offices, physical tickets to digital tickets. to the advent of online ticket brokerage marketplaces. Uh, Huge transformation, and I saw a lot of people uh, try to fight it, um, failingly, and it was very clear that disruption is not confined to the music industry. It happens everywhere, all the time, no matter who you are, where you are in the world, and it's going to keep happening. So the quicker you can get comfortable with disruption being the norm, and the quicker you can accept like fundamental changes, which may go against your own interests within an industry or a business, just the easier life will be for you. And I think again that comes back to being a product of are you interested in history, or do you read a lot? Um, it's funny, like how many conversations I have with other Bitcoiners about books. You think, oh, wow, Bitcoiners read a lot of books. It's like, no, people who read a lot of books become Bitcoiners
Mm.
because they have such a vast knowledge base. They're doing the same exercise. Um, so yeah, there's definitely an overlap there.
Yeah, I love that formulation. That's great. And I wanted to ask you about just education. You mentioned, and first of all, you do a lot of educating online, obviously about Bitcoin. But you also read a lot of books yourself. You read a lot of biographies of really successful people and industrialists and people who have been successful in business. You have this kind of wide array of past professional experience. When you sort of think about your children, when you think about education for them, what it's going to look like in this world that's being rapidly and profoundly changed by both AI and Bitcoin, kind of the combination of those two things. If you were giving advice maybe to, or thinking maybe about yourself, 10 years down, I don't know how old your kids are, but when they get a little bit close to, I guess, high school age, what's some educational advice that you would give? If you were kind of telling an eighth grader right now, like, hey, looking at the future, I'm someone who's been through a couple of transitions themselves, both in the music industry and now in Bitcoin. Here's how I would, here's some tips that I can give you to educationally prepare yourself for the future. What would those be?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are in history of what would be the most useful thing to know at that point in time. And I think we're going to go into a very messy transition period between these, you know, two battling forces of unsound money and sound money, which is also another way of saying economic illiteracy and economic literacy. So I think arming your kids with an understanding of economics, Austrian economics and microeconomics, will probably be one of the most important things because, again, if we're going back to you ask parents, what do you want for your kids? Like, oh, I want them to be happy. I want them to do what they love. It's like, okay, what's the foundation for that? For them to have the security to be able to then go out into the world and focus on their craft. And for me, that's the bedrock is some kind of savings, um, and that comes from saving in something that can't be debased. You want to understand that you have to understand money and history and economics. So that'd be the main thing for me.
Sadly, I think those are probably precisely the things that are most like under indexed on, I think
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's a kind of a sad story in a way is, so I, uh, was never a teacher, but I studied at many different business schools and I worked at a business school. And I had a very frank conversation with a dean once. We were playing on the same softball team, and he had studied economics in Chicago. And I, at that point, had already started my journey down the rabbit hole. I was like, hey, but we got kind of deep into, we were actually talking about the music industry. But then we got onto the topic of economics and, um, you know, Keynes. And uh, yeah, I kind of asked him like blankly after a couple of beers, like, but why do you guys teach that? And, he kind of just said, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And it's very sad, but it's just the reality of the incentives. So you're not going to get an accurate picture if you're learning at institutions which are being funded by, a faulty system.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I feel like there's a similar thing going on in English departments right now, which is a whole nother can of worms, which I don't want to get into. But yeah, I think that's definitely pretty spot on. I'm curious to because you're making me think about criticisms potentially. But is there any criticism of Michael Saylor that you've encountered that you find, Or I guess what's the most credible one? The one that you take the most seriously, if there is one, where you say, okay, that's fair.
I'm not sure. I don't know a single person that would be perfect. Uh, so I kind of am just thinking when I meet someone or there's someone I find interesting, I'm like, what can I learn from this person? I don't know Michael well enough to like be able to critique his personality. The conversations I've had with him briefly where it's been one on one, no cameras, no podcast or whatever. I found him to be almost identical to the Michael you would get on a podcast. He's not. There's no show that's being put on. That's just seems to be who he is. I'm sure there are going to be more and more criticisms of Michael going forward. The bigger strategy becomes, perhaps maybe the wealthier he becomes, that is only going to up in ante. So yeah, I don't have an answer for that.
Do you worry about him like sort of getting to the place where Elon's at now, where Elon is so wealthy that people can't, there's a kind of a cohort in society that can't see past just the number, just the wealth number itself. And it's kind of like whatever Elon does, we hate it, whether it's good, bad, neutral, it doesn't matter. We hate it because he's Elon and he has whatever hundreds of billions of dollars. Do you worry about Saylor getting there where everything he does is basically polarizing and, yeah, I guess even more so than it is, or just more public and criticizable?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a good measure of how healthy a society is in their critical thinking, if that's the case. So, I mean, I would expect that to be the case, but I would hope that you know we kind of evolve our thinking to understand that um, you know pension funds having exposure to Bitcoin is probably better than them being exposed to government bonds.
Yeah, always, it was always very interesting to me when people would criticize Elon and they'd sort of be all these Tesla protests and whatever. And I want to be like, you guys realize that you know Tesla is like the sixth biggest holding in like by weight in like the any S&P index fund that literally everybody's retirement who has a retirement is, and so you're actually like inviting people to nuke their own retirements in some ways, which makes really no sense at all. But I guess that's just kind of the times that we live in where,
Yeah, Logan,
yeah,
you're unfortunately bringing logic to an emotional argument, which
that's a
is
occupational hazard.
yes,
Um, yeah, so we don't necessarily need to go down that rabbit hole either. But I'm interested in too in education. So you were really good at Bitcoin education. Like you're very clearly skilled at breaking down complex ideas into easily digestible things. And there are a lot of people out there doing, quote unquote Bitcoin education, like trying to do it. Some people do it really well. Some people, not so much, but there's kind of like an art, I think, into conveying the information. And I'm sure you're orange pilling or have orange pilled people in your orbit, friends, family, perhaps. But what are the challenges that you see in that? What do you think some people are missing when they're trying to do that? And what's maybe like a pitfall that you've fallen into when it comes to education, maybe educating people around you that you've been able to overcome?
yeah. I've spent a lot of time trying to convince people about Bitcoin that I love, and now I don't do that anymore. I make it clear that I know a lot about this topic, and if you were interested in it, you can always come and ask me. So now I pretty much just field inbound inquiries, if that makes sense. Because there's enough people in the world who are eager to learn and are, um, grokking Bitcoin at a faster rate, depending on where in the world you live. Um, so yeah, the best use of my time now is just create educational resources that can be used by everyone. Because in some parts of the world, it's not a battle to convince someone about, money that's permissionless and censorship resistant that they can self custody. The only thing they're lacking is, education. Someone actually just explaining it to them. So yeah, if I can create resources that help someone in that process, and with Bitcoin, it's very similar to a lot of grassroots movements where you have pockets that pop up all over the world. It happens at a person to person level, or a 1 to 100 kind of meetup group. We've kind of seen the explosion of Bitcoin meetups and how well they have done at facilitating um, Bitcoin. So, yeah, what resources do people need if they're giving a talk to 100 people? Well, not everyone's a great orator, but most people use slides. So, okay, can I solve that one problem for people? Great. Their job gets a lot easier. They look a lot more legitimate. So that's kind of what I focused on.
Yeah. And you give everything away for free too, as we mentioned earlier. That's, I think, clearly important to you. You know, why? And why is that? Why is that important to you? I mean, I view that as, I think that's awesome. I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. But why make that decision?
Yeah, thank you. It's also incredibly self-serving, right? So this way, my name gets to a lot more places that otherwise it would not. So, my first book, the Bitcoin Handbook, that was released for free. And, today it's in 10 languages. If I'd put a paywall in front of that, I don't think that would be the case. Um, so, yeah, it's it's helped me just as much as other people, I'm sure, have been helped by it. So it sounds very noble, but it's also very self-serving.
Well, intelligent also in kind of like a long term. I think a lot of people jump the gun and they sort of want the initial short term cash grab. Like, oh, I'm just gonna sort of, I guess, get these one time conversions. Maybe, but you probably radically reduce the amount of those that you get when you put up that paywall. Whereas it takes a certain level of confidence in and kind of a long term vision of what you're working on, of the undertaking that you're a part of, to, I think, say, okay, no, I'm actually going to give it. I'm going to forfeit these sort of upfront conversions to some extent, because I think there's a bigger long term conversion that's going to happen here, that's more important. So, I mean, I think that's pretty smart. So another thing, I guess, kind of just starting to sort of angle towards the end here, but I have some somewhat scrambled questions here too that I'm
Go
thinking
for it.
about. Um, Saylor has this thing about Ethereum where, I think it's in the book too, where he says basically it took me 10 minutes to decide that this was not a thing. Um, so I want to talk about, so just get your take on the world of other cryptocurrencies. I mean, obviously there's a lot that's deficient there. I would argue that I think one of the things that especially the Ethereum community, I think absolutely is abysmally awful at, they completely suck at, is and that's not the only thing they suck at, but is storytelling. There's a complete lack of coherence around Ethereum, and I think that's a big part of what I would consider kind of the failure of it. Is that there is no Michael Saylor of Ethereum, and I think for a good reason. He would articulate those, but I also think there's no really compelling story about Ethereum as well. But how do you think about that?
So there's a great essay by Parker Lewis called Bitcoin, Not Blockchain. And in it, he kind of just lays out in a very logical manner from first principles why Bitcoin is the innovation, and any other business token, what have you, trying to capitalize on, blockchain technology is just ultimately flawed, because you'll always be then competing with Bitcoin, and you know digital scarcity was the innovation. So all these other applications you try to create, they're never going to command the pure monetary premium that Bitcoin does as this perfect form of engineered money. So you're welcome to go out and experiment and try to do whatever you want, but you've already lost. You've already lost the battle. So I guess I don't even really pay any attention to anything outside of Bitcoin anymore. But I will get vocal if I see someone, what I believe to be like harming others in promoting something that is, you know, uh, cannot succeed long term. If you're marketing something as ultrasound money or
Hmm.
digital oil or whatever tagline, different communities using today, it's just very sad, because you just know a lot of people are going to get hurt, and it's just delayed their path to Bitcoin by a cycle or two. So
Yeah, I think the Ethereum thing is like, I mean, if I could maybe brainstorm and draft or conceive of like the worst kind of example of trying to, I guess, I forget who had this term, like ride two horses with one ass. That's kind of the Ethereum story. Like the ultrasound money thing was just like the dumbest. Like you're obviously going to lose that to Bitcoin, but I think in the process of them pursuing that, they also lost the other side of things to a host of other sort of faster projects. I mean, in the conference in DC, I'm curious if did you see Saylor's? Did you watch his speech at the DC conference a few weeks ago?
I saw part of it.
So
Yeah.
part of it. Because he started to talk about something which I thought was interesting, which is kind of where my thinking has been going recently. I'm not sure if he would go all the way here, but I mean, I think we're at a point now where, when it comes to I guess altcoins, I actually think that to the extent that any of them survive, they basically survive to the extent that they like synergize with Bitcoin and just serve as basically rails on which to move Bitcoin, because the infrastructural rails themselves are fast, but like not to have their own, have a token that has some monetary premium attached to it, but literally they are useful to the extent that they are able to assist in like scaling or moving Bitcoin faster than you could otherwise move it. And even that, maybe that doesn't work, but that's really everything sort of like lives long enough. It either dies or it lives long enough to synergize with Bitcoin. I think you're kind of seeing that with Solana now a little bit, where there's a lot of projects that are just like trying to use it to move a lot of Bitcoin. I think that is Saylor actually mentioned both Solana and Sui at his um, keynote, which I thought at DC, which I thought was interesting, because he seemed to be suggesting like, look, this is in no way competition to Bitcoin. This is just to say that money is becoming digital. We have to be able to move it really, really fast. So I mean, like, there's a reason why Bitcoin blocks are what they are in terms of the time that it takes. But is it in the realm of possibility that other rails would be used just for their infrastructural value of like speed, if you could do it in a way that didn't compromise your Bitcoin in any way?
Yeah.
Is that plausible? I think he was saying probably. But we'll see. I just think it's going to really break a lot of altcoin folks' hearts if that's kind of the pinnacle of all those projects, is just to.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? It's like, firstly, Bitcoin only exists natively on the Bitcoin blockchain. And, you want to talk about speed. There's already, other scaling solutions in Lightning and Liquid. Um, and then when you talk about these other applications, if say there is another technology that can help speed up Bitcoin transfers, well, why do you need a token? What's the point of that? Right. So, yeah, I think the deeper you go down the mining rabbit hole and understanding the link between, okay, miners need to be compensated. What do they want to be compensated in? Well, they want to be compensated in money. Okay, what is money? And then it just kind of creates this loop. So anything that has removed um, the energy component or the proof of work component from its, crypto, uh, what are you even doing? Why do you need a token? Um, so yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think like the token thing is where kind of all falls apart for me. But I think it's just interesting to hear Saylor think about, just in terms of like the infrastructural possibilities of it. It was like he was just throwing that out there into the audience just to kind of experiment, just see like, hey, how's this gonna land? But but yeah, I can imagine like every Ethereum person just like kind of weeping about that, which is good. We love to see Ethereum people emotionally falter. But anyway, so I guess what is next for you, Anil? Do you have any other like what's your next project? Have you started thinking about it yet? Do you have an idea that you're kind of kicking around right now that you're looking to get started on?
not immediately. I like writing books. I think I'll be doing that for a while. The immediate focus right now is there's been a huge interest for translated versions of the Treasury of Michael Saylor. So hopefully, probably pretty soon, there'll probably be about 5 or 6 different versions or different languages out. And then probably another wave after that. So that's where the focus is at the moment. The Spanish edition is pretty much ready. So that should be out very
Nice.
soon. There's a very special forward as well from someone very notable, which I'm excited about. And yeah, that's what I'm on.
Very cool. Very cool. And I guess another thing I'm interested in, 2 more rapid fire questions, and then I promise I will close. But
Yeah,
you
go
respond,
for
and
it.
then I just like more things pop in my head. So I wanted to ask you, uh, which thinkers do you think had the biggest influence on Saylor? Question 1, and I'll let you answer that, and then I want to test some metaphors on you, and then I'll ask you my last couple of questions. So, what thinkers do you think, if maybe 2 or 3 philosophers, historians, technologists, industrialists, 2 or 3 thinkers who philosophically had the biggest influence on Michael Saylor?
Yeah. I think the biggest historian definitely be Will Durant and his wife Ariel to an extent. Just he's kind of said there's 10,000 different histories out there. Um, so the fact that he kind of has settled on consuming Will Durant and then encouraging others to consume Durant's work, I think it's a pretty big testament. Um, I he wrote his like high school thesis, I think, around Machiavelli, which is pretty interesting. You can find it online.
Wow. Okay.
And then other than that, I think he's just obsessed with technology. So he looks at all the kind of titans of the industrial age as they're technologists, right? They're pioneering a new technology, which then just happens to spawn into businesses as an offshoot. So yeah, I would say go read Durant if anyone's
Yeah,
listening.
I think correct me if I'm wrong here, Neil. I think the Durant, the history that he's referring to that he wrote is, that's like a 10, 15 volume, massive. I think it's like
Yeah,
an enormous, like it's like a multi-volume.
yeah.
This is not like a single book.
Well,
Yeah.
so there's the story of civilization, which is like, I think, 13 volumes, if I'm correct, where each one kind of focuses on a different period of history and a person. I'm actually working through the one about Voltaire right now. But then Will and Ariel Durant also put together a 100-page book called The Lessons of History,
Well, I didn't know that.
which
That's
is
good.
just, the core lessons of what does not change over time, given human behavior. And that was an excruciating exercise for them to put that book together
I
because
can't
they're used
imagine.
to, writing 1,000-page volumes in rich detail. So to condense all of the lessons that they've learned from going through that process to 100 pages, it's one of the most valuable books, in my opinion.
Anil, what's going to happen, of course, is that as this Bitcoin thing continues to take over the world, and we're all around for hopefully decades and decades, you are going to be doing a similar thing, I'm sure. Your Treasury of Michael Saylor is going to balloon probably into multiple volumes. And then you will probably have to undertake this process yourself
Yeah.
of condensing it down to 100 pages of, the most important lessons to glean. So in a way, I think this whole thing is a foreshadowing of your own lot in life. And I'm going to just call that right now, Anil, and I'm going to be on record saying I think that's what we're going to see in 20 years from you. I think the market will demand it. We will demand it. But I think that's inevitable at this point.
Cheers, Logan.
All right. So last question, and then I'll ask you one wrap up is, so I love Michael Saylor metaphors that he uses. And he has this thing where he talks about, he banged his head up against the wall for like a decade and a half, 2 decades, trying to find like the next billion-dollar idea or whatever. And he basically arrives at, okay, my idea is to kind of, it's almost Socratic, where he realized the whole like Socrates, like, real knowledge is knowing you don't have any. And he kind of realized that my big idea, my billion-dollar idea, is realizing that I do not have the billion-dollar idea. It's literally to recognize the other billion-dollar idea that exists, Satoshi's idea. And so the metaphors that I try to like sort of throw out of my own head to describe what Saylor has done, because I do think he's generationally important. And there's a whole cohort of Bitcoiners, I think, who are, I think for whatever reasons that reflect maybe more on them, on Saylor, just sort of reflexively are allergic to him because he wears a suit and is very rich. But I personally, I think he's generationally important. I think posterity will look back on and judge him the same way. I view him as like, here are the 2 metaphors I would throw at you. So his innovation is he doesn't discover fire, but he is somebody who maybe picks up some like piece of an animal and like puts it on top of the fire for the first time and says, "Oh shit, this is food. Like I can,
Yeah.
this is." Or he's not the first person. He doesn't discover the wheel. He didn't invent the wheel, but he decides, oh, maybe if I strap 2 of these things to like an axle, I can now kind of sort of reinvent transportation, transportation logistics in a way where it's like you are the sort of like second big innovation on top of the Cambrian, I guess, innovation that's sort of like the Cambrian explosion that unlocks everything. Like you were almost like the layer on top of that. Do you think that's trite, or do you think that's fair?
No, I think that's absolutely fair. I mean, Carnegie didn't invent steel.
Right.
He commercialized it. Rockefeller, didn't create crude oil in a chemistry lab. He refined it. So yeah, it's seeing what other people can't see with the resources around you. And a lot of people understood Bitcoin before he did and understood it better than he did. But he was the one to connect the piece between, Bitcoin and its place in corporate finance and how it might force capital markets to evolve. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked you that because you definitely, that was a better articulation of that than I gave it. And you made me think of this Brian Johnson idea, the health guy, where he says, I think he has this. I don't even know if it's his line, but it's like talent, is hitting the target that nobody else can hit. Genius is hitting the target that nobody else can see.
Mm, that's
And I do
perfect.
think, and that's kind of what you were basically what you were saying there is that Saylor, what will make posterity view him like Carnegie or Rockefeller, in my opinion, is that kind of like what you were hinting at. He is hitting a target that heretofore nobody had seen before. They did not have the imagination, I guess, to fully put it
Yes.
together and execute on it, which he did. So, well, my last question for you, Neil, is you're obviously a big reader. You mentioned that you're reading the Will and Ariel Durant series. Any other books that you're reading that you would recommend to the listeners, or maybe books that you've recently read that you think are just more people should be reading, that are high impact, high signal stuff that might change the way people think?
Yeah, one that I actually just finished, which I loved, and going back to your background around arts and humanities is Robert Caro's book about I think it's either called On Working or just Working.
Yeah.
Just yeah, outlining his process and how he kind of put together his biographies. I just found it fascinating.
Yeah, I've read some snippets of that, and it's totally fascinating. And his like epic sort of, I guess, life's work of the LBJ,
Yeah,
all those biographies. Yeah, which
yeah,
I have
and
not tackled
especially
those, but
yeah when he's kind of going through the first book he ever wrote about Robert Moses and about how we were talking about focusing on your craft and beauty and doing things just for the love of it. You've got this guy clearly brilliant, just working completely unknown for years, on this book that no one's ever going to read potentially. Um, so he's doing it for the love of it. He's doing it in poverty as well. So yeah, amazing story.
yeah, I read one story about him once that was like somebody was describing him saying he is the type of person who, I guess his motto was like turn every page. Like I will read
Yes,
every single thing about that was my subject that I'm working on has ever read or put together, and ask every question.
it's a
There we
list
go.
of documentaries that I've got to watch. So,
Yeah,
so there's a documentary made about called Turn Every Page. Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Very cool. Well, Anil, I want to give you a chance to just direct everybody to where they can find you, where they can get your work. Again, the book is The Treasury of Michael Saylor. I obviously highly recommend everybody pick it up, and check it out. But where can people find you and your work, Anil, and follow what you're doing?
yeah. If you want to read the book, head to treasuryofsailor.com. You can download it for free in PDF and EPUB. Otherwise, head to my Twitter handle, Anil said so. And yeah, there's links to all my work there and presentations that you can download for free as well.
Awesome. Well, Anil, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for putting this book together and giving this to the world. I think I speak for everybody saying thank you for doing that. We appreciate it.
Yeah, cheers, Logan. Glad you found it interesting and useful.
Absolutely. And for everybody else, thank you for listening. We will see you next time.